practice violin. If we haven't met, hi, I'm Megan. I'm a violinist and teacher currently based in New Jersey. I've been playing the violin for over 20 years. I have my bachelor's and master's degrees in violin performance, and I'm a Suzuki trained teacher. So needless to say, I have practiced a lot. If you're enjoying my videos, please make sure you're subscribed to my channel. It really helps me out. In this video, I'll be sharing with you exactly how to structure your practice session, how long you should be spending on each element of the practice session, and how to practice your pieces so that you actually see progress. I know that you're busy and I know that you don't have just hours on end to dedicate to practice. So when you do sit down with your instrument, I want to make sure that your time is worth it and that you are reaching your goals. 2025, a new year, there's no better time to assess ourselves and reach for new heights. If you're looking for more support and guidance and a cheerleader along your violin journey, check out Learn Violin Online, which is my flexible, self-paced online learning program. It's always linked in the description. There are 3 components to a practice session: warm-ups, exercises, and pieces. Your warm-ups should take about 10 to 15% of your practice time. So if you have an hour to practice, they should take about 10 or 15 minutes. Warming up is extremely important, not only for our body, but also for our mind. I remember when I was getting my master's degree, our teacher was so adamant that we needed to warm up before we practice. She would say, even if you only have 30 minutes to practice, I'd rather you spend 5 or 10 minutes warming up than just diving into your pieces. Obviously, as we get older, warming up physically is very important just to prevent injury. But also when we're warming up, it helps us get into the mental space of practice, helps us forget about all of those other distractions and really focus so that we can make sure our time is going to be worth it. In your warm-ups, I suggest including exercises for both your right hand and your left hand. I love open strings. I think everybody should start with open strings. And then I also like a lifting and dropping exercise for the left hand. That exercise, I'm just gonna place all my fingers down on the string, lift them one at a time, then one after another, then in pairs, and then in threes. You can also do this with your fingers on different strings for an extra challenge. After I do my warm-ups for the right and the left hand individually, then it's time to merge them. My personal go-to exercise is Shadiak number 1. I start out very slowly and just gradually increase the tempo. Some other popular choices are subject or quiz or 2. If you're not at that point where you have a go-to warm-up exercise or go-to warm-up etude, don't worry. After you do your individual warm-ups for the hands, then you can jump into scales. How you practice the scales are going to be very different depending on, your playing level and what scales you have to practice. But for me personally, I like to practice my scale once with a drone so I can really focus on the intonation and just play it slowly. And then I'll do the scale acceleration sequence, which starts slowly and builds up speed. I'll choose 1 scale a day, depending on what my students are playing or a piece that I'm working on. If you're a more beginner or intermediate player, you probably have 1 or 2 scales assigned to you from your teacher. I suggest, again, just playing them slowly, working on your intonation, maybe even doing different bowing patterns, and then practice your arpeggios as well. If you're a more advanced player like me who knows all the scales, I suggest just rotating through them. After your warm-ups, it's time to move on to etudes. Now, this may or may not be applicable depending on your playing level. If you're a beginner player, you're most likely not going to be playing any etudes. If you're intermediate or advanced, you probably will be playing 1 or 2. Personally, I think it's very important to understand why you are practicing certain etudes. It's not just because or just because my teacher told me to. What are you trying to accomplish with that etude? So for me, with my students, the very first etudes we do are for note reading. So I like that I can read music books by Joanne Martin, and then I move into either my first etude album by Henry Whistler or Wolfart. After they can read music fairly well, I'll introduce shifting etudes, third position etudes, double stop etudes. An etude should be about 15 to 20% of your total practice time. So if you're practicing for an hour, you spend about 15 to 20 minutes on etudes. And again, you don't always have to be practicing etudes. If you don't have an etude to play, that's totally fine. Just move on to your repertoire. Spend at least half of your practice time on repertoire. This is exactly how you're going to practice your repertoire to see the best results. You're going to divide your piece up into sections. This is vital if you are playing pieces that are extremely long. And you're playing multiple pieces at once, because chances are you're not going to have time to practice everything every day. If you're playing a shorter piece, you probably will, but still a good idea to divide it up into sections, even if it's just 2 sections. You're going to pick the hardest ones to start with. Remember, the point of practicing is not to sound good, it's to get better. You're going to play through the section, and then you're going to assess what went well, what didn't go so well. You can maybe make a list on paper or just in your head of the things that you'd like to improve. Then you need to use the correct practice techniques to solve that problem. Say, for example, you noticed that your intonation was off in a couple measures. You wouldn't practice that part with the metronome because that doesn't help with intonation, that helps with speed and timing. But you might practice it very slowly with a drone or with a tuner or check with open strings. After you've identified the problem, you need to use the correct practice tools to fix them. And by the way, when you join Learn Violin Online, I give you a massive spreadsheet of all of the possible problems that you could come across and how exactly to fix them. Once you tackle that issue, then you need to put it back into context. And this does not mean playing the whole entire section again. This means maybe playing a couple measures before and a couple measures after, and then gradually increasing the length of the section that you're playing. Also, I think it's very important to only try to fix one thing at a time. It can be really easy to get overwhelmed and worked up with all of the things that we want to practice or all the things that we want to fix, but the reality is we're human. We can only do so many things at once. So if there's a particular section where you want to work on 3 different things, focus on one thing at a time. After you've practiced the parts that you've identified that you want to improve, then you play through the whole thing one more time, or the whole section one more time. And ideally, you record yourself to see how you did. I used to keep a practice notebook where I would make note of the things that went well, things that didn't well, things didn't go well, things that worked, things that didn't work, so I could keep that for reference when I would inevitably forget. And that's it. For me personally, I know I'm a creature of habit and I like to do things in a certain way, right? So I personally find it sometimes beneficial to switch up the order, maybe doing repertoire first and then scales and then etudes, something like that, just so I can keep it fresh. But that's how you practice violin. To sum up, you start with your warm-ups, which include stretches, open strings, left hand warm-ups, and then putting it together through an exercise, and of course your scales. Then you practice your etudes if they apply to you, and make sure that you really know what you're trying to accomplish with each etude. If you're unsure, your teacher can tell you. And then your repertoire. You divide it up into sections, you play the section, you identify what you want to improve, you use the correct practice techniques to improve those things, and then you put it back into context. Then you can repeat with different sections depending on how much time you have that day. If you have any questions about how to practice violin, please leave them in the comments and I'm happy to help. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to check out Learn Violin Online.